The parking garage was eerily quiet that Tuesday evening when Carlo Martinez heard the scream. Most people would have called security or pretended they didn't hear anything. But Carlo had spent too many years protecting people to ignore someone in danger, even if his own life had fallen apart trying to do the right thing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would prove that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing, and that the person you save might just be the one who saves you back. Carlo adjusted his security guard uniform one more time as he walked through the underground parking garage of the Phoenix Business Center. The polyester fabric scratched against his shoulders, a constant reminder of how far he'd fallen from the tailored suits he used to wear when he was somebody important. Back when people knew his name for the right reasons. These days, he was invisible. Just another minimum wage worker pushing through the night shift so he could pick up his 8-year-old daughter Sofia from after-school care in the morning. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now worked security for the same type of corporate buildings where he once commanded six-figure consulting fees as one of the most sought-after cybersecurity specialists on the West Coast. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. Carlo's radio crackled with the usual chatter from the front desk, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating how many more months of this job it would take to finally catch up on Sofia's medical bills from her asthma treatments. The math never worked out the way he hoped. That's when he heard it. A woman's voice, sharp with fear, echoing off the concrete walls from somewhere near the elevator bank. Carlo's hand instinctively moved to the flashlight on his belt as he quickened his pace, his training from another life kicking in despite the years that had passed. "Please, just take the purse. I won't report this." Carlo rounded the corner and saw them. A woman in an expensive business suit pressed against the wall, her briefcase scattered on the ground, contents spilling across the oil-stained concrete. Two men stood in front of her, one holding what looked like a knife that glinted under the harsh garage lighting. "The purse isn't enough, lady. We know who you are. That fancy car, that designer watch. You've got access to real money." Carlo should have called for backup, should have followed protocol and radioed for the police. But the woman's terrified expression reminded him too much of Sofia's face during her worst asthma attacks, that same helplessness that made his chest tighten with the need to act. "Hey!" Carlo's voice rang out across the garage, deliberately loud and confident. "Security." "Step away from the woman." The two men turned, and Carlo could see them sizing him up. Middle-aged guy in a rumpled uniform, no weapon visible, probably thinking he was just another rent-a-cop who would back down when things got serious. They had no idea that before his world imploded, Carlo Martinez had spent 3 years in Army cybersecurity and another 5 building digital fortresses for Fortune 500 companies. More importantly, they didn't know that he had nothing left to lose except the one person who still believed he was a hero. "Walk away, security boy. This isn't your business." Carlo took 3 steps closer, his hands visible but ready. "Actually, it became my business the moment you decided to threaten someone in my building." The woman's eyes met his for a split second, and he saw something there beyond fear. Recognition, maybe, or just desperate hope that someone was finally willing to help. What happened next would change everything for both of them, though neither could have predicted it in that moment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, wearing the most ordinary uniform, carrying the weight of past failures, and the fierce love of a father who would do anything to show his daughter that good people still exist in the world. The knife-wielding attacker lunged forward, but Carlo's reflexes hadn't dulled, despite years of pushing a mop and checking visitor badges. He sidestepped the thrust and grabbed the man's wrist, using his momentum to slam him against a concrete pillar. The knife clattered across the floor as Carlo's training took over. Muscle memory from a life he'd tried to forget. The second attacker hesitated for just a moment too long. Carlo spun and delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus, dropping him to his knees, gasping for air. Within 30 seconds, both men were on the ground, and Carlo was already reaching for his radio to call the police. "Jesus Christ!" The woman breathed, staring at him with wide eyes. "Where did you learn to do that?" Carlo helped her gather the scattered contents of her briefcase, noting the Technova Solutions logo on several documents. "Army training, long time ago." He handed her a tablet that had skidded under a nearby car. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Thanks to you." She stood and really looked at him for the first time, her gaze lingering on his face with an expression Carlo couldn't quite read. "I'm Sarah Chen, CEO of Technova. And you are?" "Carlo Martinez, Building Security." He gestured toward his name tag, suddenly self-conscious about the cheap plastic badge. Sarah's face went very still. "Carlo Martinez." She repeated the name slowly, like she was testing how it sounded. "You wouldn't happen to be the same Carlo Martinez who used to run Phoenix Cyber Solutions?" Carlo's stomach dropped. Of course she would know. In the tech world of Phoenix, his fall from grace had been spectacular enough that people still whispered about it at industry conferences. That was a long time ago. 5 years ago, you were accused of selling client data to competitors. Your company folded overnight. Sarah's voice wasn't accusatory, just stating facts. But there were always people who said something didn't add up about that whole situation. The police sirens were getting closer. But Carlo felt like the walls of the parking garage were closing in. This was exactly why he'd taken a job where he could be invisible, where no one would recognize him or remember the headlines that had destroyed everything he'd built. "Look, Ms. Chen, I should get back to my rounds. The police will be here soon to take your statement." "Wait." Sarah caught his arm. "I remember now. There was an investigative article in Tech Weekly about 6 months after your company went under. They found evidence that suggested someone had framed you, that the real data breach came from inside your client's own network." Carlo stopped walking. He hadn't seen that article. After the initial scandal, he'd stopped reading anything about technology or cybersecurity, unable to bear seeing his name associated with corporate espionage. That doesn't matter now. The damage was done. But it does matter. The article said you'd completely disappeared from the industry, that no one could find you for comment. Sarah was studying his face intently. "You've been working security this whole time?" "Among other things. Night janitor, warehouse worker, whatever paid the bills." Carlo's jaw tightened. "Look, I appreciate you trying to be nice, but I've got a job to finish and a daughter to pick up in the morning." "You have a daughter?" "Sofia. She's 8. Despite everything, Carlo's voice softened when he talked about her. "She's the reason I can't afford to take risks anymore. She's got asthma, needs regular treatments, and insurance doesn't cover everything." The police arrived then, their flashlights cutting through the garage as they took control of the scene. Carlo gave his statement with practiced efficiency, sticking to the facts and deflecting any questions about his background. The 2 attackers were arrested without much drama, both of them still groggy from their encounter with Carlo's military training. As the police finished their paperwork, Sarah approached him again. "Mr. Martinez, I'd like to offer you a job." Carlo almost laughed. "Ms. Chen, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not qualified for anything at a company like yours anymore. My reputation in tech is shot. What if I told you that 3 months ago my company was hit by the most sophisticated cyber attack we've ever seen? Our security team couldn't trace it, the FBI couldn't crack it, and we hired 2 different consulting firms who both came up empty. I'd say you need better consultants. The attack is still ongoing. Someone is inside our network, stealing product development data, client information, financial records. They're so good that they've managed to stay completely invisible to every security expert we've brought in." Sarah's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "We're losing millions in stolen intellectual property, and if word gets out about the data breach, it could destroy the company." Carlo felt a familiar itch in the back of his mind, the same sensation he used to get when presented with a particularly challenging security puzzle. "Have you considered that it might be someone with legitimate access? An inside job?" "That's exactly what I think it is, but proving it requires someone who understands both the technical side and the human psychology behind corporate espionage." Sarah pulled out her business card. "The Carlo Martinez I remember reading about 5 years ago was famous for being able to think like a hacker while building defenses like a fortress. That was before everything fell apart. What if everything falling apart was exactly the experience you needed for this?" Sarah stepped closer. "Mr. Martinez, I don't make charity offers. If I'm offering you a position, it's because I believe you're the best person for the job. The fact that you just took down 2 armed attackers without breaking a sweat tells me that whatever skills made you successful before, you still have them." Carlo looked down at his security uniform, then at the business card in Sarah's hand. "Why would you trust someone who was accused of the exact thing you're trying to stop?" "Because sometimes the best defense against a thief is someone who knows exactly how thieves think. And because the person who saved my life tonight isn't someone who would sell out a client for money." Sarah pressed the card into his hand. "Besides, I have a feeling that whoever framed you 5 years ago is still out there, still pulling the same schemes. Maybe this is your chance to prove what really happened." The garage had grown quiet again. The police gone. The attackers in custody. Carlo stared at the business card, feeling the weight of possibilities he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. "I can't afford to fail again. Sofia depends on me." "Then don't fail. Come in Monday morning. Let me show you what we're dealing with. If you can't help us, no harm done. But if you can—" Sarah smiled for the first time since he'd rescued her. "Let's just say that Technova takes care of people who solve impossible problems." As Sarah walked toward the elevator, she turned back one more time. "Mr. Martinez, thank you. For tonight, and for considering this. I have a feeling we're going to make a good team." Carlo stood alone in the parking garage, holding a business card that might be his ticket back to the life he'd lost. Or it might be another spectacular failure that would cost him the only stability he'd managed to build for Sofia. Either way, he knew he was going to show up Monday morning, because sometimes the only way forward is through the thing that scares you most. The security radio crackled with a routine check-in from the front desk, reminding him that he still had 6 hours left on his shift. But for the first time in 5 years, Carlo Martinez allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible for someone like him. Monday morning arrived with Sofia tugging at Carlo's sleeve as he stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in years. The fabric felt foreign against his neck, like a reminder of who he used to be before everything crumbled. "Daddy, you look like the pictures from when I was little," Sofia said, her voice muffled by the inhaler she was using for her morning breathing treatment. "Before you had to work at night." Carlo knelt down to her level, smoothing her dark hair that was still messy from sleep. "What do you think, kiddo? Do I look ready to save the world?" Sofia giggled, the sound slightly wheezy but full of 8-year-old confidence. "You always save the world, Daddy. You just usually do it in a different costume." The Technova Solutions building rose 37 floors into the Phoenix sky, its glass facade reflecting the desert mountains in the distance. Carlo stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people in expensive suits hurry through the revolving doors. 5 years ago, he would have belonged here. Today, he felt like an imposter. Sarah met him in the lobby, looking every inch the successful CEO in a charcoal blazer and designer shoes that probably cost more than Carlo made in a month. But when she smiled, he caught a glimpse of the vulnerable woman who had been pressed against a concrete wall just 3 nights earlier. "Mr. Martinez, I'm glad you came." She handed him a temporary security badge. "Ready to see what we're up against?" The elevator ride to the 28th floor was silent, but Carlo could feel Sarah watching him, probably wondering if she'd made a mistake trusting her company's security to someone who'd spent the last 5 years mopping floors. He couldn't blame her for having doubts. He had them too. The IT security department was a maze of cubicles filled with multiple monitors, the kind of setup Carlo remembered from his consulting days. Young programmers hunched over keyboards, their faces illuminated by scrolling code and network diagrams. It should have felt like coming home, but instead it felt like visiting a life that belonged to someone else. "This is Jennifer Walsh, our head of IT security," Sarah said, introducing him to a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and stress lines that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Jen, this is Carlo Martinez, the consultant I mentioned." Jennifer's handshake was firm, but Carlo caught the skeptical look she exchanged with Sarah. "I've got to be honest, Miss Chen. We've been through this with 3 other consultants already. If the FBI's cybercrime unit couldn't crack this, I'm not sure what one more person is going to accomplish." "Show him what we're dealing with," Sarah said quietly. Jennifer led them to a conference room where the walls were covered with network diagrams, printouts of code, and timeline charts that looked like the work of someone slowly going insane. It started 4 months ago with small things, email delays, minor system glitches, nothing that raised red flags individually. But when we started mapping the incidents, we found a pattern. She pointed to a timeline covered in red marks. Every breach correlates with our major product development milestones. Someone knows exactly when we're about to announce new features, sign major contracts, or release financial reports. They're always one step ahead of us. Carlo studied the charts, feeling that familiar itch in his brain that meant he was starting to see connections others had missed. What about access logs? Who has administrative privileges? That's the thing, Jennifer said, pulling up a laptop screen. The access logs show legitimate users logging in during normal business hours, but the data exfiltration is happening during off hours when those same users are verifiably not in the building. Cloned credentials, Carlo murmured, leaning closer to examine the screen. Someone's created perfect copies of legitimate user accounts, but to do that, they'd need physical access to the servers, not just remote access. Which brings us back to an inside job, Sarah said, but we've run background checks on everyone with server access. Polygraph tests, financial audits, the works. Everyone came back clean. Carlo was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities. What if clean was the point? What if whoever's doing this specifically chose people who would pass those tests? Before anyone could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the building. Red lights flashed on every computer screen, and Jennifer's laptop started displaying error messages faster than she could read them. What's happening? Sarah's voice was tight with controlled panic. Jennifer's fingers flew across her keyboard, but every command she entered seemed to make things worse. It's a total system lockdown. Every server, every workstation, every piece of connected equipment. We're completely frozen. Through the conference room's glass walls, Carlo could see IT staff running between cubicles, phones pressed to their ears as they tried to coordinate a response to something they clearly didn't understand. The building's elevators had stopped working, the electronic door locks were failing, and somewhere in the distance, fire alarms were adding their own piercing notes to the chaos. How long until backup systems kick in? Carlo asked. They should have kicked in already, Jennifer said, her voice cracking with stress. Whoever's doing this has taken control of everything. Even our isolated backup servers are showing the same lockdown message. Sarah's phone was ringing constantly, but the calls kept dropping due to the network failure. Our quarterly investor call is supposed to start in 2 hours. We're presenting the new product line that's supposed to save the company. If we can't access our own systems. The presentation files are all on the locked servers, Jennifer finished, along with everything else. Financial records, client data, development codes, contracts, everything. Carlo was studying the error message on Jennifer's screen when something clicked. The syntax of the code, the specific way the lockdown was implemented, the timing of the attack. He'd seen this signature before, 5 years ago, when his own company had been systematically destroyed. I need access to a clean workstation, he said suddenly, something that's not connected to your main network. We don't have anything like that, Jennifer said. Everything here is integrated. Then we need to create one. Carlo was already moving toward the door. Is there a computer store nearby? Somewhere we can buy a basic laptop and mobile hotspot? Sarah looked at him like he'd lost his mind. You want to go shopping while our entire company is under attack? I want to fight back. But to do that, I need to work from outside their control. Carlo paused at the door. Whoever's doing this wants you to feel helpless, to think that calling in more experts or throwing more money at the problem will solve it. But sometimes the best way to beat a sophisticated attack is with simple tools and old-fashioned detective work. The stress on Sarah's face was replaced by something that might have been hope. How long do you need? Give me 4 hours. Our investor call is in 2 hours. Then I'll work faster. Carlo looked around the room at the charts and diagrams that represented months of failed attempts to solve this puzzle. But I'm going to need something from you first. I need a list of everyone who was involved in investigating the data breach at Phoenix Cyber Solutions 5 years ago. IT staff, executives, outside consultants, law enforcement contacts. Everyone. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood what he was suggesting. "You think this is connected to what happened to your company? I think whoever destroyed my life isn't done yet. And I think they've been using your company to perfect their methods." Carlo's voice was grim but determined. "The good news is that I know exactly how they think, because they've been trying to destroy me for 5 years. As Carlo headed for the elevator, he could hear Sarah explaining to Jennifer that they were about to trust their company's survival to a disgraced security consultant armed with nothing but a theory and a laptop from Best Buy. It should have sounded insane. Instead, it sounded like the first real plan anyone had come up with in months. 4 hours to save a company, clear his name, and prove to his daughter that sometimes the good guys really do win. Carlo Martinez had faced worse odds before, though admittedly not while the clock was ticking quite this loudly. Carlo's fingers moved across the keyboard of the basic laptop with a rhythm that felt like coming back to life. In the coffee shop 3 blocks from Technova, surrounded by college students and freelancers who had no idea that a corporate empire was hanging in the balance, he was finally in his element again. The mobile hotspot gave him just enough internet access to work without connecting to any compromised networks. The first breakthrough came when he cross-referenced the attack signature with archived code samples from his own company's breach 5 years earlier. The similarities weren't obvious unless you knew exactly what to look for, but to Carlo's trained eye, they were unmistakable. The same elegant brutality, the same psychological warfare disguised as technical prowess. Marcus Webb. The name surfaced from Carlo's memory like a piece of debris from a shipwreck. Webb had been a junior programmer at Phoenix Cyber Solutions. Brilliant, but bitter. Passed over for promotion twice before Carlo had finally been forced to let him go for what HR delicately called attitude problems. Webb had made threats during his termination meeting, promises that Carlo would regret underestimating him. Carlo's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. 1 hour until investor call. Building still locked down. Board is panicking. How are you doing? Instead of responding, Carlo dove deeper into his investigation. Using techniques that existed in the gray area between legitimate security research and outright hacking, he traced digital breadcrumbs that led him through a maze of shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, and offshore accounts. Webb hadn't just disappeared after destroying Phoenix Cyber Solutions. He'd built an entire business around corporate sabotage, selling his services to companies who wanted their competitors crippled from within. The pattern became clear as Carlo mapped out Webb's activities over the past 5 years. A tech startup in Seattle that folded after a mysterious data breach. A software company in Austin that lost its biggest client when proprietary code appeared on the black market. A biotech firm in San Diego that missed a crucial FDA deadline when their servers were mysteriously compromised. Each attack bore Webb's signature, and each victim company had been financially absorbed by the same corporate conglomerate based in Denver. Meridian Acquisitions. Carlo had never heard of them before, but a quick search revealed a company that specialized in buying distressed tech firms at basement prices, then turning them around and selling them at massive profits. The perfect cover for someone orchestrating the distress in the first place. Carlo's phone rang. Sarah's number. "Carlo, where are we? The board is talking about calling the FBI, the SEC, maybe even filing for bankruptcy protection. They think this attack is going to destroy the company." "It is," Carlo said, still typing furiously. "That's exactly what it's designed to do. But not by some random hacker group or foreign government. This is a coordinated takedown orchestrated by someone who wants to buy Technova for cents on the dollar." "What are you talking about?" "I'll explain everything in 30 minutes. But first, I need you to do something for me. I need you to call an emergency board meeting for right after the investor call. Tell them you found the source of the attacks and you have proof." "Do we have proof?" Carlo's screen lit up with a directory of files he just extracted from a poorly secured server in the Cayman Islands. Financial records, communication logs, and most importantly, a detailed plan for Technova's acquisition that included timeline projections for when the company's stock price would hit rock bottom. "We have more than proof, we have everything." The next 20 minutes were a blur of downloading evidence, documenting connections, and preparing a presentation that would either save Technova or end Carlo's second chance before it had really begun. As he worked, his mind kept drifting to Sofia, probably sitting in after-school care right now, doing homework and waiting for him to pick her up like he had every day for the past 5 years. She deserved better than a father who lived in the shadows, afraid to use his skills because of what had happened the last time he tried to do the right thing. At exactly 1:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the investor call was scheduled to begin, Carlo walked back into the Technova building, carrying his laptop and a folder full of printed evidence. The building was still in lockdown mode, but Sarah had arranged for security to escort him directly to the executive conference room, where she was waiting with Jennifer and 3 board members who looked like they were attending a funeral. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlo said, setting his laptop on the conference table, "I'd like to introduce you to Marcus Webb, the man who's been systematically destroying your company for the past 4 months." The presentation Carlo gave over the next hour was unlike anything he'd ever delivered. Not just because he was revealing a conspiracy that reached back 5 years and involved millions in illegal profits, but because for the first time since his world had collapsed, he felt like himself again. The words came easily, the evidence spoke for itself, and the room full of executives who had started the meeting looking defeated began to sit up straighter as they realized what they were hearing. Webb had infiltrated Technova through a consulting firm that Meridian Acquisitions had recommended during a cybersecurity audit 6 months earlier. Using legitimate credentials and inside knowledge of the company's systems, he'd built a series of back doors that gave him complete control over the network. The random glitches and minor breaches had been psychological warfare, designed to make Technova's leadership feel vulnerable and uncertain. The final lockdown was meant to coincide with the investor call, creating maximum panic and driving the stock price into freefall. But here's what Webb didn't count on, Carlo said, clicking to his final slide. The same techniques he used to hide his activities can be used to trace them. Every digital footprint he thought he'd erased. Every cryptocurrency transaction he thought was anonymous. Every communication he thought was secure. It's all here. Jennifer was staring at her own laptop screen, watching as Carlo's counter-intrusion software systematically dismantled Webb's network of backdoors and restored Technova's systems to full functionality. "How did you break through their defenses so quickly? Our team spent months trying to crack this." "Because I helped design some of the security protocols they were exploiting. 5 years ago, when Marcus Webb worked for me, I taught him everything he knew about network infiltration." Carlo's voice was steady, but there was an edge of old pain there. "What I didn't teach him was honor, the difference between using these skills to protect people and using them to destroy them." Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications as Technova's systems came back online. Emails flooded in, server status lights turned green, and somewhere in the building, elevators started moving again. But more importantly, the evidence Carlo had gathered was already being transmitted to the FBI's cybercrime division, complete with enough documentation to secure criminal warrants and freeze Meridian Acquisitions' assets. The investor call, when it finally happened, was unlike anything the board had expected to deliver. Instead of apologizing for technical difficulties or announcing delays in product development, Sarah stood before a room full of potential investors and told them they had just witnessed one of the most sophisticated corporate espionage operations in recent history, and that Technova had not only survived the attack, but had emerged stronger because of it. "The man responsible for our security breakthrough is Carlo Martinez," Sarah said, gesturing toward Carlo, who was standing at the back of the room, still not entirely comfortable being the center of attention. "Some of you may remember Mr. Martinez from his previous company, Phoenix Cyber Solutions. What you may not know is that Mr. Martinez was the victim of the same criminal conspiracy that targeted Technova. Today, he didn't just save our company. He cleared his own name and brought down a network of corporate saboteurs who have been operating with impunity for years." The applause that followed wasn't polite investor appreciation. It was genuine recognition of someone who had achieved something remarkable against impossible odds. Carlo felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of tension he'd carried for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. After the meeting, as board members and investors filed out still buzzing with excitement about Technova's dramatic reversal of fortune, Sarah approached Carlo with an expression he couldn't quite read. "So," she said, "still interested in that consulting position we discussed? Because after today's performance, I think we might need to talk about a more permanent arrangement." Carlo looked around the conference room, at the evidence folders scattered across the table, at Jennifer, who was still shaking her head in amazement at the elegant simplicity of his solution to their impossible problem. 5 hours ago, he'd been a disgraced security guard with nothing to offer except muscle memory and stubborn determination. Now he was being offered a chance to rebuild not just his career, but his entire life. "I'll need to pick up my daughter from school first," he said. "She's been waiting a long time to see her dad be proud of his work again." Sarah's smile was radiant. "I think that can be arranged. Besides, I'd like to meet the little girl who taught her father that scared feelings and excited feelings are exactly the same thing." As Carlo gathered his things and prepared to leave the building that had represented both his greatest failure and his unexpected redemption, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations, Mr. Martinez, you've won this round. But the game isn't over." Carlo stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Marcus Webb could send all the threats he wanted from whatever federal holding cell he'd be occupying for the next decade. Today belonged to the good guys, and tomorrow would bring whatever challenges it brought. For now, Carlo had a little girl to pick up from school, and some very good news to share about her daddy's new job. 18 months later, Carlo stood in his corner office on the 30th floor of Technova, watching Sofia chase butterflies in the rooftop garden that Sarah had commissioned specifically for employee families. The garden had become a symbol of the company's transformation from a sterile corporate environment to a place where people could bring their whole selves to work. Sofia had grown 3 inches and gained the confidence that comes from watching your parent reclaim their dignity. She no longer needed daily breathing treatments, partly because they could finally afford the best medical care, but mostly because the stress that had permeated their small apartment for years had lifted like morning fog. "Dad, come look at this!" Sofia called from beside the fountain where she was examining something with the scientific curiosity she'd inherited from him. "I think this butterfly has a broken wing, but it's still flying perfectly." Carlo joined his daughter, marveling as always at her ability to find profound meaning in simple observations. The butterfly she'd noticed was indeed flying with a damaged wing, compensating with subtle adjustments that made its flight pattern unique but no less beautiful. "Sometimes broken things find new ways to be strong," he told her, thinking about his own journey from disgrace to redemption. "Like you and Sarah?" Sofia asked with a directness that still caught him off guard. Before Carlo could respond, Sarah emerged from the elevator that led to the rooftop, carrying the leather portfolio that had become her signature accessory. Her transformation over the past year and a half had been as dramatic as his own. The guarded, suspicious CEO who had hired him out of desperation had evolved into a leader who prioritized people over profits and innovation over quarterly returns. "The Phoenix Business Journal wants to do a follow-up story," Sarah announced, joining them by the fountain. 18 months after the Webb investigation, they want to cover Technova's growth and the cybersecurity consulting division you've built. Carlo's cybersecurity team had grown from just him and Jennifer to a department of 12 specialists who handled both internal security and external consulting. Their reputation for solving impossible cases had spread throughout the Southwest, bringing in clients who had been victims of corporate espionage, similar to what Technova had experienced. "Are we doing the interview?" Carlo asked, still not entirely comfortable with media attention. "Only if you want to. But I think it's important for people to see what's possible when someone gets a real second chance." Sarah settled onto a bench where she could watch Sofia continue her butterfly research. Besides, the reporter specifically asked about our employee assistance program and how it's helped other people rebuild their careers. The employee assistance program had been Sarah's idea, inspired by Carlo's story and funded by the insurance settlement from the Webb case. Technova now actively recruited talented individuals who had faced professional setbacks due to circumstances beyond their control. Former executives who had been scapegoated for corporate failures, brilliant programmers who had been blacklisted due to whistleblowing, researchers who had been pushed out of academia by politics rather than performance. "How many people are we up to now?" Carlo asked. 47, Sarah said with pride, including the new data analyst who starts Monday. She's a former Wall Street quant who got blamed for her firm's trading losses when she tried to report suspicious activity to regulators. Sofia had abandoned the butterfly and was now picking flowers for a bouquet she planned to give to Mrs. Rodriguez, their former neighbor who still babysat occasionally despite no longer being necessary. Some relationships transcended changing circumstances. "Dad," Sofia said, presenting him with a carefully constructed arrangement of wildflowers. "Do you think you'll marry Sarah?" The question hung in the air between them, unspoken thoughts suddenly given voice by an 8-year-old who had decided that subtlety was overrated. Carlo felt his face warm, and Sarah's laugh was equal parts embarrassment and amusement. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because you look at each other the same way you and Mom used to look at each other in the old photos. And because when Sarah talks about the future, she always says we instead of I." Sofia handed the bouquet to Sarah with ceremonial seriousness. "Also because I asked her if she loved us and she said yes." Sarah accepted the flowers with the same gravity Sofia had used in presenting them. "Your daughter is very perceptive." "She gets that from her mother," Carlo said softly. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching Sofia return to her exploration of the garden. The city stretched out below them, a landscape of possibilities that seemed infinite from this height. Carlo thought about the night in the parking garage that had changed everything. How a moment of choosing to help, instead of staying invisible, had led to this rooftop, this family, this life he'd never imagined was possible. "I have something for you," Sarah said, reaching into her portfolio and withdrawing an envelope. "It's not a ring, so don't panic, but it is something I think you'll want to see." Inside the envelope was a letter from the Phoenix Police Department, officially clearing Carlo's name in connection with the Phoenix Cyber Solutions investigation. The letter explained that new evidence from the web case had conclusively proven that Carlo had been framed, and that his criminal record would be expunged and his professional certifications restored. "How did you get this?" Carlo asked, his voice tight with emotion he'd thought he'd processed months ago. "I may have mentioned to the district attorney that someone who helped the FBI take down a multi-million-dollar conspiracy probably deserved to have his record cleared." Sarah smiled. "Also, Detective Morrison, who worked the original case, said he always suspected something was off about the evidence against you. He was happy to reopen the investigation once we provided him with Webb's confession." Sofia had found her way back to them, drawn by the serious tone of their conversation. "Is that good news?" she asked, studying her father's face. "Very good news," Carlo managed. "It means that officially, legally, your dad isn't in trouble anymore. All the bad things people said about me 5 years ago have been proven wrong." "I already knew that," Sofia said matter-of-factly. "I never believed you did anything bad. You're one of the good guys." As the sun set over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the glass towers of the business district, Carlo realized that Sofia was right. He was one of the good guys, and he'd finally found his way back to a life where that mattered. Sarah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people who had learned to trust each other completely. Sofia was back to chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing off the garden walls and mixing with the gentle splash of the fountain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients who needed impossible problems solved, new opportunities to help other people rebuild their lives. But tonight, on a rooftop garden 30 floors above the city where he'd lost everything and found it again, Carlo Martinez was exactly where he belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.